Rumor has it that in the upcoming Ahsoka show, we're going to get a reshoot of the iconic Anakin vs Obi Wan duel on Mustafar seen in the Revenge of the Sith. And the possibility that this might happen in Ahsoka has really a lot of fans pretty excited. And it's no surprise as to why. I mean, the prospect of revisiting the iconic fight from supposedly a third perspective never seen before sounds really cool. And the little details that we're being told about this potential Mustafar scene really adds to the anticipation. Now, of course, given that this is a rumor, the following details could end up being spoilers for the show, so you have been warned. Now, depending on which source you read, this Mustafar scene could go down in multiple ways. Supposedly, a scene was filmed whereby Ahsoka would witness the fateful duel on Mustafar, and the scene reportedly covers Anakin Skywalker alongside a dummy for a dead Obi Wan Kenobi. And so we will likely see a version of the Mustafar duel in which Anakin manages to kill Kenobi in that fight, instead of ending with Anakin's defeat. It was also reported that on top of this alternate reality scene of the Mustafar duel, another version was shot whereby Kenobi dies, but instead of him being a corpse, we now see a pile of clothes, essentially becoming one with the Force, much like what we saw in A New Hope. However, now that we've got the Kenobi show, having Kenobi becoming one with the Force might not make a whole lot of sense, considering that Kenobi still needed to grow as a character and his connection to the Force before he's ready to become one with it. So it's probably likely that the first version with Kenobi's corpse is the one that we will see in the show, if at all. At this point, you might be wondering if they're going to somehow retcon the entire events of the Revenge of the Sith or alter it in some major way, but not to worry, this likely isn't the case for reasons that I will explain later. But the supposed Mustafar scene doesn't really end there. In fact, according to Making Star Wars, the scene also encompassed Ahsoka herself fighting against Anakin Skywalker, whereby the apprentice would confront her former master, hoping to bring him back to the light, or at the very least stop what would eventually become Darth Vader and the Empire. And all of this is really quite fascinating, especially when you consider where exactly and how exactly this would fit in the timeline. You see, at this point in time when Kenobi was dueling with Anakin, Ahsoka wasn't actually anywhere near Mustafar. Instead, during the events of Order 66, Ahsoka was on board the Venator transporting a captured Darth Maul, a Venator that was ripped out of hyperspace that Ahsoka was luckily able to escape. Not to mention, the next time we see Ahsoka chronologically, we would see her attending the funeral of Padme Amidala, which takes place after the duel on Mustafar. So really, it's impossible for her to be there physically present on Mustafar at the time of the duel. That being said, the most obvious answer to the question of how Ahsoka could be there on Mustafar while also be on the run from Order 66 would be for her to access the world between worlds. This would essentially allow her to be present for both events, pretty much like how Ezra would technically be escaping from Vader as an older version of himself saves Ahsoka from the Dark Lord. However, here is where the reported rumors don't really add up. You see, the confrontation between Anakin and Ahsoka is supposedly facilitated through the worlds between worlds, which makes sense as it would allow Ahsoka to traverse through time and space. But the rumors also mentioned an added detail that a younger actress was used as Ahsoka for the shoot, indicating that a younger Ahsoka would be the one to face off against Anakin. And this really doesn't make sense given that it would be the older Ahsoka traveling through the worlds between worlds and not the younger version of herself. Now, granted, we don't actually know what happens to someone who walks through these portals, given that Ezra only stuck his hand through, so unless the portal ages or de-ages you as you walk through, having a younger Ahsoka confronting Anakin instead of an older one doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. On top of this, there is also another far larger issue, that being continuity. You see, even though the Worlds Between Worlds allows travelers to access different points in time, should they choose to interact with certain events, it would still have long-standing consequences. As far as we know, interacting with the past through Worlds Between Worlds has a linear consequence to the timeline. As it was established in Rebels, interfering with the past has a direct impact on the present, and it does not branch off into multiple timelines, essentially establishing that Star Wars operates under a linear timeline. Meaning that as Ezra pulled Ahsoka out of her fight with Vader, he essentially saved her from certain death, and that distortion to the timeline was only somewhat rectified with Ahsoka returning to the same point in time and space she was just taken out from, albeit after her duel with Vader. So what this means is that if Ahsoka does go back to the past and challenges Anakin, then it essentially means that it will retcon everything that happens after. It would mean that Vader would be aware that his former apprentice was still alive, recontextualizing this scene where he finds her saber, and the scene in Rebels where he recognizes Ahsoka through the Force for the first time since the Clone Wars.
The apprentice lives.
And with Kenobi supposedly dead in this version of the story, it would then retcon the entire Kenobi show and all the movies that follow after. So you can really see how if this scene did happen with Ahsoka going back in time, it would be seriously problematic. In fact, it would break Star Wars entirely. So I really don't think this rumor makes that much sense, and we really don't need something like this to happen in the show. It would just raise too many questions and simply cause too many issues. However, the rumor isn't without its merits. The theory does go on to specify that Ahsoka's confrontation with Anakin is driven by Ahsoka's desire to right the wrongs of her past, and that the entire sequence was designed to show Ahsoka that Anakin's fall to the dark side was inevitable, regardless of whether she left the Order or not. And this is very much what I think will be the crux of the Ahsoka show, and the main character obstacle Ahsoka will have to overcome, that being her guilt for being responsible for Anakin's downfall, kinda similar to what Obi Wan had to go through in his own show. Which is why in principle the idea of Ahsoka somehow confronting Anakin only to realize her master's fall was inevitable is a pretty good idea, and we could still see a form of this idea take place during the show. In an earlier video where I really go much more in depth about Ahsoka's character motivations and why Anakin needed to show up in the show, I talked about the possibility of Force Ghosts or even flashbacks as a narrative device to help Ahsoka solve her inner conflict, which is why a possible Force vision mixed in with the Worlds Between Worlds could be the way to do it. So effectively, Ahsoka could be placed in a position in the Worlds Between Worlds where she is presented with an alternate timeline whereby she didn't leave the Jedi Order and therefore ended up on Mustafar alongside Obi Wan to confront her former master. And the resulting fallout of this confrontation would then convince her that Anakin's downfall was inevitable and through no fault of her own. And to be fair to the rumor, the way it's described by Making Star Wars does make reference to this possibility, but it isn't explicitly clear as to whether this character realization would be made with Ahsoka going through the portal or simply viewing it. Which is why, if it is the case that Ahsoka doesn't step through the portal and only views a possibility, then it would be an acceptable way for the plot to progress. Although that being said, if the World Between Worlds is really capable of showing alternate timelines, then are these timelines part of an unrealized multiverse, or is it merely a Force vision for Ahsoka? Who knows, only time will tell. Anyways, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I'm the Lost Acolyte,
And I have spoken.